In today's video we're going to tie a fly called the EP grass shrimp. This is actually a really fun fly to tie and actually really not too hard. The first thing we're going to do is start off with the Gamakatsu SC15 1/0 hook, and we're going to use some fine monofilament thread. Monofilament isn't necessarily a must. You can just use regular, let's say 6/0 brown thread, but Puglisi uses this on the majority of his flies, so we'll continue that here. Now the first material that we're going to tie in is going to be a piece of tan shrimp or streamer brush. This is a 2-inch wide brush. We're going to tie it in by the little tip of the wire here. Several wraps. This monofilament is really slippery stuff, so I usually like to really put several well-placed wraps in place before I count on that material being secure. Now the next thing we're going to do is tie in the eyes. I just take a little plier here, and I have about a 1/2 inch of space here from the tip of the eye, and I just kind of kink them, mash it, kind of rough up that mono, and that's going to give me a place to tie it in at. Now you can make these eyes more or less pronounced depending on the look that you're going for. Most of the time shrimp have pretty pronounced bulbous eyes, so I like them to kind of really stick out of the side of the hook, just like that. And we do the same thing here on the other eye. Just mash that mono, put a few kinks in it, rough it up. Mono is such slippery stuff, you really want to make sure you get it nice and secure. And I like to kind of tie these on each side of the shank of the hook. They like to roll on you too, so just keep that in mind as you tie them in. We're going to cover all this up with our brush, so don't be too worried if you get a little bit messy. Trim out those eyes. Now you can put a piece of, or a drop of super glue on here. That'll help keep these puppies from moving on you. Just a little drop is all it takes. And you can wrap your monofilament over that. Now what you can do too is you can go in behind one of these eyes and kind of put a wrap, behind the other one put a wrap. That'll help keep them splayed out to each side. And we're going to take our thread all the way up here to the eye. Now I'm ready to wrap this streamer brush. Now I'm going to take a couple of wraps right up behind these eyes. That'll also aid in propping them to each side. And get in here with your bodkin or your dubbing brush and just make sure you trap as few fibers as you can get away with. Each wrap I kind of get in there and pick them loose. Once you're happy about your eyes, you can take that streamer brush or the shrimp brush, whichever one you're using, and just creep it forward on the shank of the hook. Now, you can tie this fly sparse. Sparse, I would say, is about a 1/2 to 1/3 of a brush. If you want to tie this fly dense, you could actually probably use almost an entire brush on this fly if you really wanted to. I like mine a little more sparse than dense. Shrimp kind of just have a few legs on the bottom, and that's really all that we're doing on this step, is tying in the underside of the fly. Now it looks like we're tying in the whole thing, but you'll see when we get towards the end that we're actually just using this material more for the legs than we are the entire top, body, and sides of the fly. So sparse is okay. Right now I'm kind of, looks like I'm on my way to making it kind of in between sparse and thick. But that's the cool thing about tying your own flies, is you can do whatever you want. Sometimes I know tarpon can get pretty picky on shrimp, and a real heavily dressed fly will not always do the trick on picky tarpons. Sometimes less is more. That's actually kind of a general principle of mine with flies in general. Less is more. Even trout. So we're getting here towards the front of the fly. Once we get here, we can just capture all this. And don't worry if it's too shaggy. We're going to trim the majority of this material out of this fly. So if it's looking real shaggy, don't worry too much about it. You can always come in with your scissors and do some trimming. And we're going to tie this fly in kind of a two-tone color today. I'm using a tan brush for the legs and body of the fly, and we'll use kind of a light olive color for the top of the fly. But you can do whatever you want. I've seen this fly tied in clear, tan, shrimp, pink, olive, two tones, purples. You can really do whatever you want. Now when we get to the front of the fly here, we capture that brush. You want to come in with some wire cutters. Just trim out the wire. I usually lay down just a couple more wraps. And we can also tie in the weed guard at this point, which is just some heavy hard mono. I like to use like a 20-pound. I just crimp it in half. Slide the loop over the eye of the hook, do 2 to 3 loose wraps of thread, tighten down, and pull that weed guard right down on top of the shank of the hook. And you can come in here, if it'll cooperate with me here, there we go, I'm going to do some wraps behind, on top, a few more behind. Go. Then you can whip finish right on top of all that. Yeah, and you can just leave them long at this point if you want. We'll just come back to them. Then you can comb out some of this shag here. You can use a dubbing brush as well, or a piece of Velcro. Just kind of get your bearings here on where all the fluff is. Get any strays out of the way. Now we're going to trim the top of this fly. We're going to trim it so that we leave just a little bit of material on the top of the fly. Not much though, just a little bit. We do the same for the sides. Leave a little bit of fluff. A little bit of fluff adds just a little bit of body to the fly, but we're not trying to overdo it. And you can trim the legs at this point. You can wait, do it all at the end. That is kind of up to you on what is easiest for you. I'm going to trim my weed guards just a little bit, just to get them out of the way. I might trim the legs just a little bit at this point too, just to get some of that out of the way, but we'll actually trim it all at the end. Okay, now we are ready for the top of the fly. For this we're going to use some super hair. You can also use other materials called, I think one's called Slinky fiber. There's all kinds of similar materials. Basically it's like a monofilament, a kinky monofilament. Like I said, we're going to use like a light olive color, but you can use a shrimp color as well. You can use clear. And you want to pull out any fibers that are curled or kinked. that aren't perfectly straight. We're only really looking for the straight fibers. We're going to take this clump and we're just going to tie it right on top of the shank of the hook. And I like to kind of tie a couple wraps in front of the weed guard, behind the weed guard, just to really make sure that it's secure. We tie it right on top of the shank of the hook. And we come in with a couple pieces of pearl crystal flash. I like to use midge crystal flash on this fly just because it's a little more supple. It'll move a little bit with the fly. We tie it right on top. I take a couple of wraps and I double it over itself. That way it doesn't come unraveled on me. And you want to make sure that you center it right down the middle of the top of the fly. And we take one strand of the black crystal flash, same thing, right smack dab on top of the fly. This is kind of like their the little black intestine line that a shrimp has through its body. That's basically what we're imitating. There we go. Then we can whip finish. At this point we can trim out that mono. We're essentially done tying the fly. Now we can trim the head of the fly. I like to kind of come in here at an upward angle, leave about 1/4 of an inch or so facing off the front of the fly. You can kind of taper it to your liking. There we go. Now for the fun part, the glue. So I'm going to take this entire clump of super hair and I want to kind of fan it out so that I get a thin but tall clump going on here, and I kind of crimp it and grab it behind the eyes. Let me see if I can turn my vise. See how thin it is there? So I kind of want to give this fly some height, but I don't want it to be wide. So I kind of fan it all out, just like that. And I come in here with my resin. Now for this fly, you can use a couple different things. You can either use the UV resins, which we'll use today, mainly just for speed and ease of showing you how to tie them. If you're going to fish the fly, the UV resins aren't quite as durable, so I would probably use an epoxy for this if I was going to fish them. But for today, for demonstration purposes, we're going to use some of the UV resin. And I like to build it up in layers. So what we'll do is we'll come in here, you want to make sure you get all the fibers together here, because once we lock this in place with that first glop of resin, everybody's going to be set. So now we're going to take our resin here, and I'm just going to take a generous dollop of it, run it down the top, and then I'm going to come in here with my light, lock it all into place. Now that was my first layer. We're going to do this several more times, kind of just slowly building it up, putting shoulders on this fly on each side, and also locking it to the body of the fly. Make sure your eyes are also where you want them, because we're about to put some glue down near those eyes. So I'm going to lock it to the body by just running a little strip of glue at the base And this will essentially lock the fly to the body. Now I'm going to come back just a little bit farther here. I'm going to run another little bead on top, kind of gradually getting thicker as I go down, and lock it in. This might look a little harder than it is, but once you've tied a couple of these, you'll see that this super hair just kind of absorbs and lets this resin just kind of run down it, so you can kind of adjust how much and where you want it by how much you squeeze out, and also how many layers you do. Now, a lot of this is personal preference as well on how thick you want it. I mean, honestly, that's probably pretty good right there. The fish would probably eat that fly just like it is. If you're looking to build up a little bit more of a body, some guys like it a little chunkier, you can actually invert this fly. Let's see if I can get this to work here. And this will help build up the body tall-wise, or height-wise I should say, because instead of sinking all down into the body at this point, it's all going to drip towards the top of the fly. But again, like I said, personal preference. The fish will probably eat it just like the way I had it a second ago. They won't care too much. There we go. And now we can start to trim the fly. So I'm going to pull my weed guard out of here a little way, out a little bit. We're going to trim the legs. I like my legs to be about the distance to the tip of the end of the hook. Now you can see that's a pretty blunt cut. I like to come in with the tips of my scissors. Whoopsie, I just trimmed my weed guard on accident. That's okay. And get in here with your tips of your scissors and kind of make these little legs more uneven by just trimming some of that material out of there. Probably not a necessary step, but just makes it look better, makes me feel better. There we go, and we can trim our weed guard so that it sweeps right to the tip of the hook, just like so. Now for the important part, and that is trimming the back of this fly. Now you want this fly to be about 2.5–3 inches long total. So I come in here and I'm just going to trim that super hair at an upward sweeping angle. It's better to do little pieces at a time rather than trying to cut it all at once. There we go. I'm pretty happy with that. And we can add more resin if you want. You can add it a little farther back. You can do whatever you want. But as long as you extend about a ½ inch past those eyes, that helps keep it from fouling. Then you're in pretty good shape and you've got a pretty good fly going. And that is the EP grass shrimp. Real buggy little fly. Really fun to tie. I don't know, maybe not for everybody, but I really like tying this fly. I get a lot of feeling of accomplishment after I tie this fly because it just looks so shrimpy when you're all done. So Very rewarding little fly to tie. Can tie in endless colors. Stick to the, of course, shrimpy colors. But I've seen guys tie this in like a purple color too, which is not what you would think would be shrimpy, but it apparently works pretty good. Fun little fly to tie. That is the EP grass shrimp.